Imagine for a moment, you are in Azkaban, the most fearsome prison in the wizarding world, surrounded by dementors that suck all happiness from your soul. You have been condemned for treason and murder, crimes you never committed. 12 long years pass while you rot in a cold cell, knowing that the true culprit is free, living a normal life. This is the story of Sirius Black, the man who was simultaneously considered the most dangerous dark wizard of his time and one of the most courageous heroes in the fight against Voldemort. A story of loyalty, betrayal, brotherly love and sacrifice that forever changed the destiny of the wizarding world. Subscribe. Before we continue with this epic journey through the life of Sirius Black, I need to ask a favor from you. If this content is being useful, if you're enjoying this deep analysis of the Harry Potter universe, subscribe to the channel. We're chasing the goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription makes all the difference. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new content, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching this video from. I love knowing where our community passionate about this magical universe comes from. Sirius Black III was born on November 3rd, 1959, into one of the oldest and most traditional pure-blood families in wizarding Britain. The Black family had a lineage that dated back to the Middle Ages, and their family tree was filled with dark wizards, blood purity fanatics, and followers of the dark arts. The family motto, engraved on the black coat of arms, was "Toujours pur," always pure, which perfectly summarized the family obsession with pure blood supremacy. The Black family home was located at number 12 Grimmauld Place, London, a dark and imposing property that reflected the somber values of its inhabitants. The walls were decorated with trophies of stuffed and displayed house elf heads, portraits of ancestors who screamed racist insults, and dark objects accumulated over generations. It was a toxic and oppressive environment, where any sign of compassion or tolerance was seen as weakness and betrayal of family tradition. Sirius's parents, Orion and Walburga Black, were second cousins, a typical arranged marriage of pure-blood families to maintain the purity of the lineage. Walburga was particularly fanatical in her supremacist beliefs, a cruel and hysterical woman who ruled the house with an iron fist. Orion, though less vocal than his wife, completely shared her convictions about pure blood superiority and disdain for muggles and muggleborns. Sirius had a younger brother, Regulus Arcturus Black, born in 1961. While Regulus embraced the family values from an early age and became the model son their parents always wanted, Sirius questioned everything from childhood. He observed the cruelty with which his parents treated Creature, the family house elf, and felt repulsion at the hate speeches he heard daily at home. This fundamental difference in personality between the brothers would create a fissure that would only deepen over the years. The Black family had deep connections to the dark arts. Many of their ancestors had been followers of dark wizards throughout history, and several cursed objects decorated the house as trophies of pride. Sirius's own great-great-grandfather had attempted to make the Ministry of Magic legalize Muggle hunting as a sport. It was in this environment of institutionalized hatred that Sirius grew up, developing from an early age a deep aversion to family values. On September 1st, 1971, Sirius Black boarded the Hogwarts Express for the first time, at 11 years old. His family expected him to be sorted into Slytherin, like all the Blacks before him for generations. In fact, there wasn't even the possibility of considering another house in his parents' minds. Being a Black automatically meant being a Slytherin. But fate had other plans. During the sorting ceremony, when the sorting hat was placed on his head, there was a long and considerable pause. The hat clearly sensed the boy's internal conflict, his rejection of family values, and his brave and rebellious nature. Finally, to the absolute shock of the entire school, the sorting hat shouted "Gryffindor," the first time in generations that a Black didn't go to Slytherin. His family's reaction was one of horror and shame. Furious letters arrived from Grimmauld Place, with his mother screaming about dishonor and family disgrace. But for Sirius, being in Gryffindor was liberating. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who valued courage, loyalty, and justice above blood purity and tradition. It was in Gryffindor that Sirius formed the most important friendships of his life. He quickly became inseparable from James Potter, a boy with messy hair and round glasses who became his best friend, and in many ways, a chosen brother. James came from a pure-blood family, but unlike the Blacks, the Potters were known for their kindness, tolerance, and opposition to prejudice against Muggle-borns. For Sirius, the Potter family represented everything he wished his own family could be. Along with James, Sirius grew close to Remus Lupin, a quiet and studious boy who kept a terrible secret, and Peter Pettigrew, a shy and awkward boy who admired the other three. The four boys became known as the Marauders, an inseparable group that would transform Hogwarts into their personal playground through elaborate pranks and dangerous adventures. Sirius's personality at Hogwarts reflected his natural charisma and intelligence. He quickly became popular among his peers, especially for his sense of humor and inseparable friendship with James Potter. Together, they were known for their constant mischief and ability to bend rules without fear of consequences. Academically, Sirius was intelligent and talented, but didn't always dedicate himself to studies. He preferred to employ his creativity in spells and magic, useful for his adventures as a marauder. His ability was essential for him, James, Remus, and Peter to become animagi while still at school. Despite his confidence and charm, Sirius also demonstrated a strong and impulsive temperament. He didn't accept insults or injustices quietly, and his impulsiveness often put him in risky situations, a characteristic that would remain throughout his life. During his years at Hogwarts, Remus Lupin had to deal with a terrible secret. He was a werewolf. So that he could attend school, Dumbledore organized a special scheme. Every full moon, Remus was taken by Madame Pomfrey to the Shrieking Shack, through the hidden tunnel under the Whomping Willow. There, he faced the painful transformation alone. His closest friends, James Potter, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew, eventually discovered the truth about his condition. Instead of rejecting him, they remained by his side with absolute loyalty. Moved by the desire to help him, they decided to learn extremely complex and risky magic, transformation into animagi. The process of learning to become an animagus took intensive secret study time. They had to keep a mandrake leaf in their mouths for an entire lunar month, recite complex incantations daily, and risk potentially fatal consequences if they made any mistake. Sirius showed a natural aptitude for transformation magic, and his animagus form revealed itself to be a large black dog. Ironic, considering that the dog had always been seen as a symbol of loyalty, a quality that would define his entire life. James transformed into a stag, which later inspired his nickname Prongs, and Peter became a rat, nicknamed Wormtail. Remus earned the nickname Moony for obvious reasons, and Sirius became Padfoot, a name that initially irritated him, but which he eventually accepted as a symbol of the group's unconditional friendship. Full moon nights transformed from moments of solitary agony for Remus into shared adventures by the four friends. The werewolf, when accompanied by other animals, became gentler and more controllable. Sirius, in the form of a large dog, was particularly effective at calming and directing the wolf, creating a special connection with Remus that would last throughout their lives. With their new transformation abilities and intimate knowledge of Hogwarts grounds, the Marauders became famous for their pranks and daring feats. They completely mapped the castle, including secret passages and escape routes unknown to most, and from this work was born one of their most notable creations, the Marauders map. Meanwhile, Severus Snape had developed a suspicion regarding Remus Lupin's monthly absences and tried in every way to discover what was hidden behind them. In an act of recklessness, Sirius told Snape how to deactivate the Whomping Willow, leading him directly to the path of the Shrieking Shack during the full moon. On the other side, Remus was transformed into a werewolf. At the last moment, James Potter intervened and managed to pull Snape back, preventing him from being attacked and killed. The incident was taken very seriously. Dumbledore intervened, making it clear that Snape had seen too much and that silence about what had occurred would be mandatory. This episode forever marked the tensions between Snape and the Marauders and consolidated Snape's hatred for James and Sirius. James Potter, on the other hand, gained a life debt from Snape, who was forced to accept that his enemy had saved his life. This debt would become crucial years later, when James and Lily were betrayed and murdered. Snape, in turn, developed an even deeper hatred for Sirius, seeing him as a psychopath willing to kill for fun. During his years at Hogwarts, Sirius's relationship with his family deteriorated completely. While Burger Black could not accept that her firstborn son had been sorted into Gryffindor and openly rejected the blood purity values she considered sacred. For her, Sirius was a disgrace to the Black name, and his presence at Grimmauld Place became increasingly unbearable. The final breaking point happened during the summer, during the holidays after he turned 16. Unable to continue living under the family's oppressive rules, Sirius ran away from home. While Burger reacted definitively, she burned her son's name from the family tapestry, symbolizing his permanent exclusion from the Black lineage. Sirius found refuge in the Potter house, where he was received with open arms. The couple, Fleamont and Euphemia, began to treat him like a second son, and James became more than a friend. He was his true brother of the heart. It was with the Potters that Sirius, for the first time, experienced what it was like to live in a loving and supportive family, distant from the hostility and cruelty that had marked his childhood. The Potters' generosity went beyond hospitality. When Sirius ran away from home at 16, they welcomed him as if he were a son, offering him not only a home, but also the affection and stability he had never had at Grimmauld Place. For the first time in his life, Sirius experienced what it was like to live in a loving and functional family, where disagreements were resolved with respectful conversations instead of screaming and cruel punishments. Meanwhile, at Grimmauld Place, while Burger Black literally burned Sirius's name from the family genealogical tree, a dark black tradition for disinherited ones who brought dishonor to the blood. Sirius's portrait was removed, and his existence was erased from official family records. For all practical purposes, Sirius Black had died to his own family on the day he chose to reject the ideals of purity. Regulus, his younger brother, was elevated to the status of sole and favorite heir. He completely embraced this role, becoming even more attached to supremacist beliefs as a way to compensate for his older brother's betrayal. The distance between the two transformed into an insurmountable abyss, with Regulus seeing Sirius as a traitor and Sirius seeing Regulus as a victim of his parents' brainwashing. Sirius's last years at Hogwarts were marked by a mixture of talent and rebellion. Living with the Potters had given him an emotional stability he had never known before, and this was reflected in his confidence and the strengthening of his friendship with James. Sirius continued to be one of the brightest students in his class, especially in Transfiguration and Defense Against the Dark Arts, areas where he excelled through quick thinking and natural courage. His nature, however, remained rebellious. He didn't accept rules he considered unfair, nor did he tolerate prejudice against Muggle-borns, something he had repudiated vehemently from an early age. This trait radically differentiated him from his family, making him even more proud of his place in Gryffindor. With James, his friendship only deepened in the final years of school. The loyalty between the two was unbreakable, and even when James began to get closer to Lily Evans, Sirius continued to be his inseparable companion. Together, with Remus and Peter, they consolidated the fame of the Marauders as some of the most legendary students Hogwarts had ever known. When Sirius completed his years at Hogwarts, the wizarding world was already plunged into the chaos of the First Wizarding War. Voldemort and his Death Eaters spread terror among both wizards and muggles, and the Ministry of Magic proved incapable of stopping the growing violence. For Sirius, this conflict was not just a fight between good and evil, but something deeply personal. Many of Voldemort's followers were people he had known since childhood, families connected to the Blacks, and even his younger brother Regulus would eventually join the Death Eaters. Without hesitation, Sirius joined the Order of the Phoenix, created by Dumbledore, to resist Voldemort. James and Lily Potter also joined, as did Remus Lupin. Peter Pettigrew was part of the group, although, in secret, he had already become a spy for Voldemort. Sirius also served as an informal spy, using his family connections to obtain information about Death Eater movements. Although he was officially disinherited, he still had contacts in the pure-blood community who occasionally let valuable information slip in his presence. During these war years, Sirius stood out as a brave and skilled fighter, fighting in risky missions alongside his friends. The war, however, took a terrible toll on all members of the Order, who lived under constant threat of death or betrayal. Sometime before 1980, James Potter and Lily Evans married. The exact date of the ceremony was never revealed, but when the First Wizarding War was already underway, the two were already living as husband and wife. Although we don't have official records about how the wedding was or who celebrated it, it's evident that the event happened amid the climate of fear and insecurity that dominated the wizarding world at that time. What is clear is that after the union, James and Lily continued side by side in the fight against Voldemort, acting as active members of the Order of the Phoenix. Both became potential targets, not only for their participation in the resistance, but also because Lily was Muggle-born, which made her a target of hatred from dark arts followers. During this period, Sirius Black remained extremely close to the couple. He and James had been inseparable since their Hogwarts days, and his friendship with Lily also strengthened over the years. It was precisely because of this closeness and absolute trust that James and Lily chose Sirius to be Harry's godfather, a decision that shows how much they saw him not just as a friend, but as part of the family. Harry James Potter was born on July 31st, 1980, at the height of the First Wizarding War, when Voldemort and his followers spread fear throughout the wizarding world. His birth brought a spark of hope amid the chaos, but at the same time carried a weight that would change everyone's destiny. Shortly before, Professor Sybil Trelawney had made a prophecy in Hogsmeade, partially heard by Severus Snape and taken to Voldemort. The Dark Lord will be defeated by a boy born at the end of July, one whom he will mark as his equal, and neither can live while the other survives. This revelation directly connected the future of the war to the birth of a child. There were two possibilities: Neville Longbottom, born on July 30th, and Harry Potter, who came into the world the following day. Voldemort, upon hearing about the prophecy, believed that Harry was the child in question and decided to act against the Potters. This choice sealed the family's fate. In the autumn of 1981, the war situation reached its most critical point. Voldemort seemed invincible, and everyone knew that James and Lily Potter were directly in the Dark Wizard's crosshairs. To protect them, Dumbledore suggested the use of the Fidelius Charm, one of the most powerful enchantments ever created. This magic would allow them to completely hide their location in Godric's Hollow. Only the Secret Keeper could reveal the information, and no one else would be able to find them. The natural choice for this role was Sirius Black. He was James's best friend since their Hogwarts days, Harry's godfather, and someone whose loyalty had never been questioned. The trust in him was absolute, and James believed there was no one more suitable to guard the family's secret. However, shortly before casting the spell, Sirius made a decision that would forever change everyone's destiny. Convinced that Voldemort would expect him to be the Guardian, Sirius feared that if he were captured, he would immediately be targeted for torture until he revealed the hiding place. He believed this would put the Potters at even greater risk. For this reason, he suggested that the secret be entrusted to Peter Pettigrew. For Sirius, Peter was the last wizard Voldemort would suspect, small, insecure, and always in the shadow of his friends. Thus, Sirius could continue serving as a distraction, while the Potters' real security would be in the hands of someone invisible to the enemy's eyes. James and Lily accepted the proposal, trusting in the friendship they had with Peter since their school days. The spell was cast, and the Potters' lives were literally in Pettigrew's hands. But what no one knew was that Peter had already become a spy for Voldemort. Driven by fear and the search for survival, he had sworn loyalty to the Dark Lord months before. When he received the supreme trust of James and Lily, he took the opportunity to deliver their location to the enemy. This choice sealed the Potters' fate. The most powerful protection in the wizarding world was broken not by force, but by the betrayal of someone they trusted blindly. On the night of October 31st, 1981, Voldemort found the Potters' hiding place in Godric's Hollow, breaking the trust they had placed in Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper. The tragedy happened in moments. James was the first to fall, disarmed, trying to protect Lily and Harry without even having time to grab his wand. Then in the baby's room, Lily refused to step aside, pleading for her son's life until the last moment. Her sacrifice generated ancient and powerful magic, unknown even to Voldemort, which caused him to be defeated when he tried to cast the killing curse against Harry. The following morning, the small Muggle village woke up to rumors of a mysterious explosion. The Potter's house was destroyed, part of the walls in ruins, and what remained of the home was marked by silence and loss. James and Lily were dead. Harry, only 15 months old, had survived, forever marked by the lightning bolt-shaped scar on his forehead. Soon after Voldemort's fall, Hagrid arrived at the scene on Dumbledore's direct orders, tasked with rescuing the baby. Shortly after, Sirius Black also appeared in Godric's Hollow. Upon realizing what had happened, his pain and shock were indescribable. His best friends were dead, and his godson had survived by a miracle. When Hagrid explained that he should take Harry on Dumbledore's orders, Sirius tried to argue that, as godfather, he should take care of him. But Hagrid was firm. He had clear instructions and couldn't disobey. Recognizing the half-giant's determination, Sirius handed over his flying motorcycle so that Hagrid could safely transport the baby to the Dursleys' house. This gesture, which demonstrated trust in Dumbledore and Hagrid, was also the last act of generosity that Sirius would be able to perform before being swallowed by the cycle of revenge and despair. While watching Hagrid leave with Harry, Sirius was consumed by silent fury. He knew exactly who had betrayed the Potters, Peter Pettigrew. This certainty would transform a few hours later into a desperate hunt that would forever change Sirius Black's destiny. Soon after Voldemort's fall on October 31st, 1981, the wizarding world plunged into celebration. Headlines announced the end of the war, Death Eaters dispersed, and Harry Potter came to be called the boy who lived. But for Sirius Black, there was no victory at all. James and Lily were dead, and the only one responsible could only be Peter Pettigrew, the true secret keeper. Consumed by rage, Sirius immediately set out in search of Pettigrew. It's unknown how long it took to find him, but it was in broad daylight, on a busy Muggle street, that the two confronted each other. In front of several witnesses, Sirius accused Pettigrew aloud, calling him a traitor and holding him responsible for the Potter's death. Pettigrew, cornered and trapped, screamed a single phrase that echoed among all those present. "Lily and James, Sirius, how could you?" Before Sirius could react, Pettigrew cast a devastating spell. The resulting explosion destroyed part of the street, killed 12 innocent muggles, and left only smoking debris. When the dust settled, all that remained of Pettigrew was a single finger found among the rubble. The truth, however, is that Peter had transformed into his rat Animagus form, escaping through the sewers at that instant. His cowardly act not only freed him from death, but ensured that the blame fell entirely on Sirius. When the Aurors arrived, they found Sirius laughing uncontrollably amid the destruction. For all those present, the scene was clear. Sirius Black, coming from a family linked to the dark arts and known for his explosive temperament, had betrayed the Potters and murdered Pettigrew along with 12 muggles. Without trial, without deeper investigation, Sirius's fate was sealed there. The wizard, who the night before had been a godfather and loyal friend, was now considered one of the worst criminals in magical history. After the explosion that devastated a Muggle street and left 12 dead, Sirius Black was captured by the Aurors. For those arriving at the scene, the picture was evident and undeniable. Sirius, laughing uncontrollably amid the debris with his wand still in hand, was surrounded by the bodies of innocent victims. Pettigrew, the supposed hero who would have tried to stop him, was nothing more than a finger torn off in the middle of the rubble. The narrative formed quickly. Sirius, the Potter's best friend and known secret keeper, would have betrayed James and Lily by delivering their location to Voldemort. Then, to cover up his betrayal, he would have murdered Peter Pettigrew, the only witness, along with 12 innocent muggles. It was a simple, convincing explanation that seemed to fit all the pieces of the puzzle. In that chaotic post-war climate, no one questioned the official story. The wizarding community was exhausted, frightened, and eager for quick answers. Voldemort had disappeared, but his followers still spread terror. The public wanted culprits, and Sirius Black, a descendant of the infamous Black family, already known for his rebellion and explosive temperament, became the perfect scapegoat. Unlike what would be expected in normal times, there was no trial, no lawyer, no chance to present his version of events. Without thorough investigation, without right of defense, Sirius was sent directly to Azkaban, summarily condemned by public opinion and the Ministry of Magic. Not even Dumbledore, who had so often defended wizards in complicated situations, openly questioned the imprisonment. The Hogwarts headmaster, overwhelmed with the task of protecting Harry and dealing with the consequences of the war, accepted the official version of events. Later, Sirius himself would say in The Prisoner of Azkaban that there was never a trial, only immediate condemnation. Even Remus Lupin, another of the Marauders, believed in Sirius's guilt. When the truth came to light years later, Lupin confessed that he hadn't suspected Peter. For him, the shock of betrayal was so great that he never imagined that the most cowardly friend was the traitor, but rather the one with whom he had the closest relationship, Sirius. Thus, in a few hours, the wizard who the night before was a loyal godfather and faithful friend came to be considered one of the most dangerous criminals of his generation. Locked up in Azkaban, Sirius lost his freedom, his honor, and the chance to prove his innocence, all without being allowed to say a single word in his own defense. Azkaban was, without doubt, the most feared prison in the wizarding world. Built on an isolated island and surrounded by the icy waters of the North Sea, its very location was already desolate. But what made Azkaban truly unbearable were its guards, the Dementors, dark creatures that drained all joy and hope from the human mind, leaving only despair and painful memories. For most prisoners, the effects were devastating. With nothing to lean on, their happiest memories were corroded little by little, replaced by recollections of fear, sadness, and loss. Many ended up going mad, unable to distinguish reality from torment, until their sanity was consumed completely. Sirius Black, however, possessed a unique advantage. Unlike other prisoners, he knew without a shadow of doubt that he was innocent. There was no guilt in his mind that could be exploited or amplified by the Dementors. This certainty served him as a mental anchor, something to grasp in moments when the shadows tried to dominate him. It wasn't complete protection, but it was enough to prevent his mind from being destroyed. There was yet another factor that helped him, his ability to transform into an Animagus. In dog form, his thoughts became simpler, less human, and therefore the Dementors had difficulty penetrating and manipulating his mind. This ability, kept secret, was essential for Sirius to manage to preserve his sanity in a place where almost everyone succumbed. Throughout the years in Azkaban, Sirius lived surrounded by screams, despair, and madness, but maintained within himself a spark of resistance. His focus was clear: survive. And while he clung to his innocence and hid behind the instinctive mind of his Animagus, he became an exception to the implacable rule of the prison. Where so many lost everything, Sirius resisted. During 12 years in Azkaban, Sirius Black survived by clinging to the certainty of his own innocence and using his Animagus form to attenuate the devastating effects of the Dementors. He had no hope of escaping, nor did he believe he would have a new chance to prove the truth. Time in Azkaban seemed endless, marked only by the suffocating presence of the creatures that guarded the cells. Everything changed in July 1993, when the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, made an inspection visit to Azkaban. As usual, Fudge carried with him a copy of the Daily Prophet and left it with Sirius after the conversation, without imagining that this innocent gesture would change the destiny of the fortress's most famous prisoner. In that newspaper, the main headline announced that the Weasley family had won a large prize in galleons and travelled to Egypt. But it wasn't the news itself that caught Sirius's attention. In the photograph that illustrated the article, the entire Weasley family appeared in front of the pyramids. Among them was Ron Weasley, smiling and holding on his shoulder his pet rat, Scabbers. For any other person, the image would have meant nothing. But Sirius immediately recognized the animal's familiar traits. It wasn't just the typical expression, a certain air that betrayed more than it seemed. There was an unmistakable detail. The rat was missing a finger from its front paw. This detail hit Sirius like lightning. He clearly remembered the street in London in 1981 when Peter Pettigrew had cut off his own finger to fake his death. Now, before his eyes, was the proof. Pettigrew was alive, hidden in his Animagus form, and had spent years disguised as a wizarding family's pet. Even more shocking was realizing the implication: Ron Weasley studied at Hogwarts, and therefore Pettigrew was inside the school. This meant he was close to Harry Potter, Sirius's godson. The same man who had betrayed James and Lily, who had delivered his friends to death, now lived with impunity near the boy who should be under his protection. In that instant, Sirius found the first true flame of hope since the night he had been imprisoned. The despair that had accompanied him for years gave way to fierce determination. No matter the price, no matter the risk, he needed to escape. For the first time in more than a decade, Sirius had a goal and a clear reason to fight against the invisible chains that kept him imprisoned. Planning an escape from Azkaban was considered impossible. No wizard until then had managed to escape from the prison guarded by Dementors, and those who tried had gone mad or perished long before getting close to freedom. But Sirius Black possessed an advantage no one else had: his condition as an unregistered Animagus. In dog form, his mind became simpler, less human. The Dementors, unable to fully comprehend animal thoughts, perceived him only as an indistinct shadow of despair. This ability offered him the only real breach to deceive the invisible guards that sucked the sanity from other prisoners. It was thus that, on a stormy night, Sirius made the decision. He transformed into a dog, escaped from his cell, and passed unnoticed by the Dementors. His body was thin and weak after 12 years of imprisonment, but the conviction that he needed to act gave him strength he had never imagined possessing. Outside, he faced the vastness of the North Sea, cold and deadly. Any other man would have given up before those dark waters, but Sirius dove without hesitation. The sea punished with relentless waves and cutting cold, trying to pull him to the depths. But the determination to find the true traitor and protect Harry kept him moving. He swam for hours, alternating between the human mind that still burned with hatred and the more instinctive consciousness of the dog, which just advanced, stroke after stroke, thinking of nothing but survival. With each meter conquered against the current, the memory of James and Lily seemed to push him forward. Exhausted, hungry, and almost unrecognizable, Sirius finally reached the coast. Staggering, he dragged himself out of the sea and collapsed on the wet stones, free for the first time since 1981. In that moment, there was no joy in his liberation, only the burning memory of Pettigrew's betrayal and the certainty that he needed to find him. The escape from Azkaban was not an end, but the first step of a hunt that would define the next chapters of his life. After escaping from Azkaban in 1993, Sirius Black headed south with a single objective: to reach Hogwarts. His escape had been unprecedented and impossible in the Ministry's eyes, and soon posters with his face circulated throughout Wizarding Britain, describing him as extremely dangerous and offering a reward for information leading to his capture. Transformed into an Animagus in the form of a thin and dark dog, Sirius could move with less suspicion than in his human form. No one would suspect that the sickly-looking animal roaming roads and villages was, in fact, the country's most wanted man. This disguise allowed him to observe, hear conversations, and approach populated areas without drawing so much attention. Despite the advantage of his transformation, Sirius was weak. 12 years in Azkaban had left him thin, exhausted, and marked by coexistence with the Dementors. Even so, the memory of James and Lily and the certainty that Pettigrew was alive gave him strength. He knew that Peter, in the form of Scabbers, was at Hogwarts as Ron Weasley's pet. This meant that Pettigrew was in the same castle as Harry Potter, his godson. The simple idea of James and Lily's murderer remaining unpunished so close to Harry gave birth to fierce determination in Sirius. His focus, from that moment, was absolute. While the wizarding world believed he had escaped to resume contact with Voldemort's followers, the truth was different. Sirius was hunting Pettigrew. Each step toward Hogwarts was not just escape, but preparation for the reckoning he had waited for more than a decade. After escaping from Azkaban in the summer of 1993, Sirius spent months lurking around Hogwarts in his dog form. He kept himself hidden in the forests and valleys, surviving as he could, always alert to movements within the castle. He knew that Peter Pettigrew was there, hidden in the form of Scabbers, and this meant that his godson Harry Potter was in constant danger. The first glimpse of Harry after 12 years didn't happen in Hogsmeade, but around the school itself. Disguised as the large black dog, Sirius observed from a distance when Harry crossed the grounds, accompanied by his friends Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. The impact was immediate. The 13-year-old boy had the same unruly hair and the same confident posture as James. But when his green eyes became visible under the light, Sirius was overcome by overwhelming emotion. They were Lily's eyes, the same ones that had so often shone with tenderness. Seeing Harry brought a mixture of pride, pain, and fierce determination. He seemed healthy, surrounded by friends, and with a liveliness that reminded him very much of his parents. At the same time, Sirius knew that Harry lived side by side with the man who had betrayed James and Lily. Scabbers, apparently harmless on Ron's shoulder, was actually Peter Pettigrew, and this meant that Harry shared nights and days with his parents' murderer. This thought tormented Sirius. He had failed to protect James and Lily, and now the idea of failing Harry too was unbearable. Every time he saw the boy from afar, the determination to act grew within him. He could no longer wait. He needed to capture Pettigrew, prove his innocence, and finally protect his godson. That year at Hogwarts, tension was already in the air from the moment students returned. The Dementors roamed the gates, the Ministry had spread posters warning of Sirius Black's escape, and everyone believed the ex-prisoner was after Harry Potter. It was on one of the coldest nights of winter 1993 that the improbable happened. Sirius managed to enter the castle. He didn't do this using secret passages. As a former student he knew many, but entry to Gryffindor Tower required something more specific: the house password. The fat lady's portrait, which guarded the door, had been damaged weeks before when Sirius tried to force his entry. After that, the portrait only accepted passwords. The mistake that opened the way for him came from Neville Longbottom, who, constantly forgetting passwords, had written them down on a piece of parchment. Sirius managed to get his hands on this paper and thus crossed the main entrance to Gryffindor like any other student would. Silent, he climbed the steps to the third-year boys' dormitory. Inside, he found Ron Weasley sleeping. At the foot of his bed, Sirius located Scabbers, the pet rat, whom he knew to be Peter Pettigrew. When Ron awoke in the middle of the night, what he saw was terrifying. Sirius Black standing beside his bed with a knife in his hand. The boy screamed, awakening the other boys in the dormitory. In seconds, chaos took over. Students in panic, teachers running, and the news spreading like fire throughout the castle. The following morning, the atmosphere at Hogwarts had changed completely. No one doubted anymore that Sirius had really managed to enter and that he represented a direct danger to the students. Doors began to be locked. Gryffindor passwords were reinforced, and the teachers' vigilance became constant. Despite this, only Sirius knew the truth. He wasn't after Harry, but after Peter Pettigrew, the true traitor who continued to sleep peacefully in the castle, disguised as a pet. On the night when the truth came to light, Harry believed he was facing his parents' murderer. Sirius Black, thin, almost spectral in appearance after 12 years in Azkaban, had managed to capture Scabbers, Ron's pet rat. For Harry, this only confirmed the image of a mad wizard, willing to attack even his friends to complete what Voldemort had begun. The location of the confrontation was the Shrieking Shack, the abandoned house in Hogsmeade that, during school years, had served as a refuge for Remus Lupin's werewolf transformations. It was a setting loaded with irony. It was there, where so many secrets had been hidden, that the surviving Marauders would meet again. When Remus arrived at the scene, everything seemed to get worse. Harry believed, horrified, that both Lupin and Sirius were united against him. But the truth began to emerge when Remus revealed that the Marauders' map had shown him something impossible to ignore. The name of Peter Pettigrew, alive inside the castle, although everyone believed he was dead. Under pressure from Sirius and Lupin, who surrounded Scabbers, the rat was forced to resume his human form. Before the incredulous eyes of Harry, Hermione, and Ron appeared a short, fat, sweaty-looking man, very different from the hero that history books described. It was Peter Pettigrew, alive after 12 years, exposed before everyone. The revelation was overwhelming. Harry felt the ground flee beneath his feet. For years, he had believed that Sirius Black had been the traitor, directly responsible for James and Lily's death. Now, before him, was the true culprit. The cowardly friend who had sold the Potters to Voldemort to save his own skin. Cornered, Pettigrew tried to deny, begged for his life, tried to turn them against each other. But there was no more escaping. His own existence proved Sirius's innocence. The pieces finally fit together. Voldemort's plan, the Potter's death, the explosion in London with 12 dead Muggles, everything had been a consequence of Pettigrew's betrayal, not Sirius's. For the first time in 12 years, the truth was revealed. Sirius wasn't the monster everyone believed. He was innocent. After the revelation in the Shrieking Shack, the situation quickly got out of control. When Severus Snape arrived, he immediately positioned himself against Sirius. Determined to hand him over to the Ministry, Snape refused to listen to Lupin and Sirius's explanations. For him, Sirius's guilt was unquestionable. In the middle of the discussion, Lupin transformed into a werewolf, as he had forgotten to take the previous night's potion. The transformation caused confusion and panic, allowing Peter Pettigrew to escape once again in his rat form. With this, the only concrete proof of Sirius's innocence disappeared. Shortly after, Sirius and Harry were attacked by Dementors at the lakeside. Both almost received the kiss, but were saved by an extremely powerful Patronus in the form of a stag, conjured by Harry, who believed he had seen his own father at that moment. Despite surviving the attack, Sirius was recaptured and taken back to Hogwarts. There, he was locked in one of the towers, where he would await summary execution, the Dementor's kiss, authorized by the Ministry without trial. At that moment, Dumbledore intervened. Unable to act directly against the Ministry, he instructed Harry and Hermione to use the Time Turner to go back a few hours in time. The two managed to rescue Buckbeak, the hippogriff that had been condemned to death, and then flew to the tower where Sirius was imprisoned. Sirius climbed onto the hippogriff's back and before leaving thanked Harry emotionally. Then he disappeared into the night, mounted on Buckbeak, finally free after 12 years in Azkaban. Sirius's freedom, although conquered, was profoundly limited. For the Ministry of Magic, he continued to be a dangerous criminal and one of Voldemort's most loyal followers. The then minister, Cornelius Fudge, refused to even consider the possibility of judicial error, admitting that an innocent man had spent 12 years in Azkaban without trial would mean a political scandal of immense proportions. Thus, posters with Sirius's face continued to be spread, and he remained officially as one of Britain's most wanted wizards. Unable to return to society, Sirius was forced to live as a fugitive in constant movement. During a period, he hid in a cave in the mountains near Hogsmeade, surviving on food scraps sent by owls and in the company of Buckbeak, the hippogriff that had escaped execution with him. Transformed into a dog, he could approach villages discreetly without calling so much attention, but could never remain for too long in one place. Despite the difficulties, Sirius maintained contact with Harry. Initially, he sent letters through owls, which meant a lot to the boy, as they were the first signs of a real family bond. Later, Sirius used the Flu network to speak with Harry directly through fireplaces at Hogwarts, even risking being discovered. These communications, although sporadic, were of enormous importance. Harry finally had someone who had known his parents, someone who could tell him stories about James and Lily and offer him support in difficult moments. For Sirius, it was the chance to exercise, albeit in a limited way, the role of godfather that life had denied him for so many years. But the distance and clandestinity were a constant torment. Sirius, who had dreamed for so long of taking care of Harry, had to content himself with protecting him from afar, powerless to intervene directly. And Harry, who had found in him the father figure he had always desired, was forced to deal with the frustration of only being able to see him in letters and brief conversations, knowing that at any moment Sirius could be captured again. When Voldemort returned to physical form at the end of Harry's 4th year, Dumbledore reactivated the Order of the Phoenix. Even while still being a fugitive wanted by the Ministry, Sirius Black joined immediately, willing to fight against the wizard who had destroyed his life and killed his best friends. The new Order headquarters was established at 12 Grimmauld Place, the old Black family home which Sirius had inherited after his mother's death. Although it was strategically perfect, protected by Fidelius' charm and located in the heart of London, for Sirius, returning to his childhood home was painful. The place was impregnated with memories of a past he had always tried to forget. The walls were covered with tapestries and symbols of pure blood supremacy. The portrait of Walburga Black, his mother, remained stuck to the wall, screaming insults and imprecations against all who dared to cross the corridor. Everywhere there were cursed objects, dark arts relics, and dangerous items, accumulated over generations. Cleaning the house became a collective task for the Order and the Weasleys, with Harry, Hermione and Ron helping during the summer of 1995. Wardrobes full of suspicious objects needed to be emptied, and cursed items had to be destroyed or safely stored. Sirius participated in this process, but frequently demonstrated disgust and anger at seeing so many symbols of the ideology he had rejected. Living at Grimmauld Place brought back bitter memories of his youth, marked by isolation and family rejection. For someone who already carried the psychological scars of 12 years in Azkaban, the house's somber environment was a heavy burden. Sirius made jokes and tried to maintain a facade of lightness, but it was evident to Harry that his godfather felt trapped again, this time within the walls that had suffocated him in adolescence. Although technically free after his escape from Azkaban, Sirius discovered that his life at 12 Grimmauld Place was not much different from a prison. As he was still considered a dangerous criminal by the Ministry of Magic, he couldn't appear in public without risking capture. Therefore, he spent most of his time confined within the Black family house, which now served as Order of the Phoenix headquarters. This situation became a constant source of frustration. While other Order members departed on missions to monitor or confront Death Eaters, Sirius was forced to remain at Grimmauld Place, unable to contribute actively. Harry's godfather, who had always been an impulsive and brave man, felt useless, reduced to offering shelter and hospitality instead of fighting on the front lines. Contact with Harry was limited to the boys' visits to Grimmauld Place during summer holidays or occasional meetings when the Order permitted. Sirius valued these moments intensely, but also projected onto his godson the memories of James Potter, which sometimes made the relationship confusing. For Harry, however, Sirius continued to be a precious father figure. The house itself made Sirius's state of mind even worse. The somber corridors, the dark arts objects hidden in wardrobes, and his mother's screaming portrait constantly reminded him of a childhood marked by rejection and resentment. Being trapped again in that hostile environment was suffocating, and Harry noticed how much it affected him. Although Sirius tried to maintain good humor and frequently showed affection toward Harry and the Weasleys, it was clear to everyone in the Order that confinement was taking its toll. He became more impatient, irritated and melancholic as the war advanced, and he remained unable to act. When Harry began visiting Grimmauld Place more frequently, it became clear that his relationship with Sirius was both precious and complicated. Harry saw in Sirius the closest relative he had, someone who truly knew and loved his parents. Sirius, in turn, saw in Harry not only the godson he had lost the chance to raise, but also a living link to James, his best friend. This mixture of feelings made Sirius, at some moments, treat Harry as if he were James himself. He would remember stories of pranks at Hogwarts, laugh about how Harry reminded him of his father in his way of defying rules, and even encouraged bold behaviors that reminded him of the Marauders' adventures. For Harry, this comparison was ambiguous. On one hand, he felt proud to resemble James, but on the other hand, he wished to be seen as himself, and not just as the shadow of someone who had already lived. Another point of tension was the question of protection. Sirius carried deep guilt for not having been able to save James and Lily, and this weight showed through in his desire to keep Harry safe at all costs. But Harry, accustomed to facing dangers from an early age and determined to fight against Voldemort, became irritated when treated like a child who needed to be guarded. This intensified especially in the 5th year, when Sirius showed impatience at not being able to leave Grimmauld Place and projected onto his godson a desire for action that Harry didn't yet fully understand. Even with these frictions, there were moments of true connection between the two. When Sirius spoke about James and Lily as real people, not distant heroes, but young people with qualities, flaws, dreams, and fragilities, Harry felt that for the first time he had a true portrait of who his parents were. Similarly, when Harry shared his fears and uncertainties about the war, Sirius offered him support, encouragement, and a sense of belonging that no one else could give. For Harry, Sirius was simultaneously a father figure, an older brother, and a friend. For Sirius, Harry was the living memory of a happy past he had lost, but also the chance to start over. This duality, between deep affection and confused expectations, made their relationship one of the most intense and painful in both their lives. During Harry's 5th year at Hogwarts, Voldemort used the mental connection between them to plant a terrible vision, Sirius being tortured in the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic. Unable to confirm if the vision was real, since he couldn't speak with Sirius through the fireplace at Grimmauld Place, Harry believed his godfather was in mortal danger. Desperate, he decided to act. Accompanied by Ron, Hermione, Neville, Ginny, and Luna, Harry travelled to London using thestrals and entered the Ministry in the dead of night. There, he found the Hall of Prophecy, where he discovered that the vision was, in fact, an elaborate trap. Voldemort and his Death Eaters wanted to lure him there to force him to retrieve the prophecy that concerned him and the Dark Lord. The group of students ended up surrounded by experienced dark wizards. The fight was desperate. Spells ricocheted through the mysterious rooms of the department, shattering glass globes and releasing magical secrets long kept. Despite their courage, the 6 young people were clearly at a disadvantage. At the most critical moment, the Order of the Phoenix arrived to protect them. Among the wizards who appeared were Kingsley Shacklebolt, Nymphadora Tonks, Albus Dumbledore, and Sirius Black. For Harry, seeing his godfather emerge in the midst of chaos was immense relief. Sirius threw himself into battle with the boldness that had always characterized him. He fought side by side with Harry, facing the Death Eaters as equals. The most striking duel was against his cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange, one of Voldemort's most fanatical followers. The two exchanged spells with intensity, the confrontation charged with family hatred and memories of a lineage that Sirius had renounced. The fight in the Department of Mysteries was brutal, spreading destruction through the rooms and testing everyone's courage. And although Harry and his friends survived, the price of that night would be irreversible. The battle would lead to Sirius's death, forever changing the course of the war and Harry's life. At the height of the battle in the Department of Mysteries, Harry fought side by side with Sirius Black against a group of Death Eaters. Harry's godfather dueled with fury, facing his cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange, whose hysterical laughter echoed through the hall. Spells ricocheted everywhere, illuminating the veil chamber with red and golden flashes. Sirius seemed to be enjoying the fight. He laughed, provoked Bellatrix, and moved with boldness, even amid danger. Harry, watching, felt relief seeing his godfather so full of energy, finally free to fight. For an instant, it seemed that Sirius was winning, but then fate turned in a second. While laughing at Bellatrix, Sirius couldn't dodge a spell cast by her. The ray hit him squarely and projected him backward. In slow motion before Harry's eyes, Sirius's body fell through the veil of death, the thin and undulating curtain that separated the world of the living from what came after. There was no scream of pain, no final words. One instant Sirius was there, dueling, alive, and the next he had disappeared beyond the veil of death without return. The shock was immediate. Harry ran toward the arch, screaming for his godfather, convinced that Sirius could still come out from behind the curtain, but Remus Lupin held him firmly, preventing him from crossing. Through tears, Remus spoke the truth that Harry didn't want to hear. Sirius had departed forever. The hall fell silent, the sound of the undulating curtain echoing like a whisper. For Harry, the loss was unbearable. He had just found in his godfather the chance of a family, only to see it torn away from him in seconds. For Remus, it was the final destruction of the Marauders. James and Sirius dead, Peter a traitor, and only he remaining. Sirius Black, who had lost youth, freedom, and years in Azkaban, had now also lost his life. His death was as sudden as it was devastating, marking Harry forever. Sirius's death was a devastating blow, especially for Harry. More than anyone else, Sirius represented for him the possibility of a true family. Since they had met in the Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius had offered him something no one else could. A direct connection to James and Lily, living memories of who his parents had been, and the promise of a home outside the hostile environment of the Dursleys. Losing Sirius meant losing again what Harry most desired, a family that would accept and love him unconditionally. The pain was even greater because it happened before his eyes. Harry saw his godfather fall through the veil of death, and for long seconds believed he could return. The despair at being restrained by Lupin, who prevented him from crossing the arch, made it clear that there was no return. In the days that followed, Harry plunged into a state of deep and silent mourning. Guilt consumed him. If he hadn't believed Voldemort's vision, if he had thought to check better before acting, Sirius would never have gone to the Department of Mysteries. Harry carried the feeling that his impulsiveness had directly caused his godfather's death. The Order of the Phoenix also felt the loss. Sirius had been one of the most dedicated members in the fight against Voldemort, and even confined to Grimmauld Place. He had served as host and logistical support point for the entire resistance. His absence left a practical and emotional void in the group, which was already suffering important losses since Voldemort's return. For Harry, however, Sirius's death was more than strategic or symbolic. It was personal. He had lost not just an ally, but the last direct link to his parents. This pain would shape his maturation, reinforcing in him the conviction that he couldn't afford to repeat impulsive mistakes. Still, for a long time, guilt remained as a constant shadow, adding to the weight that Harry had already carried since childhood. Sirius Black's death was one of the most painful losses of the war against Voldemort, but the Ministry of Magic never officially recognized his innocence. To the public, he continued to be remembered as the dangerous Azkaban fugitive who had escaped in 1993, accused of betraying the Potters and killing 12 Muggles in the explosion caused by Peter Pettigrew. Even after Voldemort's fall in 1998, there are no records that his name was cleared or that he received any posthumous recognition. Unlike other war heroes, Sirius remained officially marked by crimes he never committed. His entire life was unjustly defined by a false accusation and a conviction without trial. For those who really knew him, however, the truth was never in doubt. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the Order of the Phoenix members knew that Sirius was innocent, that he had been a victim of Pettigrew's betrayal and the Ministry's haste to find a culprit after Voldemort's fall in 1981. This private certainty, however, was not enough to restore his honor before the wizarding world. The contrast is bitter. Sirius spent 12 years in Azkaban for crimes he hadn't committed, fled only to be hunted as a criminal until the end of his life, and when he finally found in Harry the chance to rebuild a family bond, the war took him away again. His death in the Department of Mysteries brought no justice, only silence and more pain. Thus Sirius's story remained as a dark reminder of the failures of the wizarding justice system. a man who chose to break with his family to fight for what was right, but who could never fully live this choice, neither in life nor in official memory. Sirius Black's story offers deep lessons about choice, sacrifice, and the complexity of human nature. It demonstrates that our families and circumstances don't determine who we become, that we can choose our own values and create our own families based on love and mutual respect instead of blood and tradition. It also shows the terrible price we sometimes pay for doing the right thing. Sirius could have had an easy and privileged life if he had simply accepted his family's values and become another pure-blood supremacist. Instead, he chose a much more difficult path, which led him through family rejection, unjust imprisonment, and premature death. But perhaps the most important lesson of Sirius's life is about the importance of truth and justice. His unjust imprisonment and the devastating consequences that followed show what happens when societies sacrifice fair processes in favor of quick and convenient answers. Sirius's suffering serves as a permanent warning about the dangers of judging without adequate evidence and allowing prejudices to influence legal decisions. In the end, Sirius Black died as he had lived, fighting against injustice, protecting those he loved, and refusing to submit to the forces of darkness. He never had the life he deserved, never had the chance to be the godfather he dreamed of being for Harry, and never had the opportunity to find the peace he had sought for so long. But his story continues to inspire, reminding us that even in the most impossible circumstances, we can still choose to be good. Even when the whole world turns against us, we can still maintain our integrity. And even when the price of doing what's right seems unbearably high, it's still worth paying. Sirius Black's life was a tragedy in many aspects, but it was also a testament to the human capacity to transcend our origins, to choose love over hatred, and to fight for justice even when it seems impossible to achieve. In a world that often seems dominated by darkness, Sirius Black's story remains as a light, imperfect, sometimes flickering, but never completely extinguished. And perhaps that's the deepest truth about Sirius Black. He wasn't perfect, but he was good. He made mistakes, but learned from them. He suffered immensely, but never allowed his suffering to transform him into a cruel person. In the end, he lived and died according to his own terms, faithful to the values he had chosen to embrace instead of those he had been born into. This is the complete story of Sirius Black, not a myth or a legend, but a real man who faced impossible choices and most of the time chose correctly. His life reminds us that true nobility doesn't come from the blood that runs in our veins, but from the decisions we make and the sacrifices we're willing to make for others. And in that aspect, Sirius Black was truly noble until the end. And so we reach the end of this epic journey through the life of Sirius Black, one of the most complex and fascinating characters in the Harry Potter universe. And please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. We're building a community passionate about deep analyses of the wizarding world, and your participation is fundamental for us to continue bringing content like this. Until next time, and always remember, the choices we make reveal who we really are, much more than our abilities or our origin. A big hug.